not only is Knots and Crosses the first Inspector Rebus book from Ian Rankin, but it's one of maybe the first crime novel that I ever read, so it's got a very special place in my heart. I have adored following Rebus's journey over the last, I think, 11 years, maybe 10 years when I started reading Ian Rankin. But Knots and Crosses was actually originally published in 1987, and I won't spoil the plot. I will read the description from IMDb to give you a little overview, and then I'll talk about the things that I like and, well, I was going to say dislike, but did I dislike anything? I don't believe I did. And for that reason alone, just not disliking anything makes it great, but there are so many reasons why I think it's absolutely fabulous. So, just very quickly, if you're not familiar, Ian Rankin is a Scottish crime writer, and his Inspector Rebus series is by far his most notable works and easily one of the most beloved crime series in all of, well, certainly in all of Scottish crime fiction and also just in all of crime fiction in general. And the Rebus series is set completely, I suppose, for the most part, completely in Edinburgh. Now, I'm from Aberdeen, but I have been to Edinburgh several times and it's beautiful, but it does lend itself well to crime because there are a lot of old Scottish architecture and alleyways and Flesh Market Close, which is one of his later books. It's a brilliant setting, fantastic choice, and it's great to grow as Rebus grows as a character, to learn more about the city as you read. So the description from this one is as follows. I should also point out this was before Police Scotland became Police Scotland, so it would have been Edinburgh and Lothian Police at the time, I believe. So the synopsis from Amazon UK is as follows. And in Edinburgh, of all places, I mean, you never know. You think that sort of thing would happen, do you? That sort of thing is the brutal abduction and murder of 2 young girls. And now a third is missing, presumably gone to the same sad end. Detective Sergeant John Rebus, smoking and drinking too much, his own young daughter spirited away south by his disenchanted wife, is one of many policemen hunting the killer. And then the messages begin to arrive, knotted string and matchstick crosses, taunting Rebus with pieces of a puzzle only he can solve. So there are many things that I love about this. The narrative itself, fantastic. I will be honest, I prefer crime novels that are about murders. I think they're the most fascinating, they're the most invigorating, and they always hook me in more than one about theft or gangs or anything like that. A good, juicy murder story. I love it. And the fact that it's kind of a bit more of a classic detective story in the sense that we have these pieces of the puzzle turning up. So Rebus isn't, bearing in mind this was in the late 80s, Rebus isn't just looking at the early stages of forensic science, he is dealing with actual pieces of a puzzle, which is great because Noughts and Crosses is a puzzle? I guess, would you call Noughts and Crosses a puzzle? I suppose so. But I like that double meaning. So the narrative is fantastic. I love the way it develops. I think the character of Rebus is obviously the driving force behind this, but we have enough characters peppered throughout that he meets, people that he speaks to on a daily basis, that it feels like a full, meaty novel. It's not just one detective hunting for this killer. There's enough going on to keep you hooked, even if for some weird reason you didn't like Rebus as a character. I think there's enough going on that you could still enjoy the narrative itself and finding more about these murders. However, Rebus is brilliant. He is a broken man from day one. He, as it says there, smoking and drinking too much. He's not in the best of health. His young daughter, who, by the time you get to where Rebus is today, it's weird to think of his young daughter as being a young girl. But he doesn't get to see her. He's obviously no longer with his wife. And he is just a very pessimistic person. But it's so entertaining to read because he's so grumpy, and when he's bouncing off of a really jolly police constable who's, not yet kind of ground in, it's very funny. I wouldn't say it's a comedic crime. There are people who write crime that's quite funny. For example, Stuart McBride is my favourite contemporary writer ever, and his crime fiction errs more towards the humour and the ridiculous sometimes, and it's brilliant. But I'd say Rebus is titillating, but not comedic. But it does have enough light moments that it doesn't drag you completely through the mud with it. There's a scene in this in the library which I think is absolutely fantastic, and I love it. There are some great settings and locations. Off the top of my head, I can't remember if we go to the Ox in this one, or if that was perhaps first cameoed in a later episode series. But I will say the Ox pub, the Oxford, you have to go to it if you haven't. I went there and it was basically empty because I went at a weird time of year. And it's, yeah, it really helps to bring the narrative to life by being able to visualise it. And Rankin does utilise well-known places in Edinburgh as well as lesser-known places, so you can use your imagination sometimes. And then if you're familiar with Edinburgh, you can very clearly visualise other aspects of it. So I think the balance is great. The narrative of Noughts and Crosses is fantastic, a great way to launch the character of Rebus, who is very broken, and that makes him very, well, relatable in parts, because we probably will all see at least one of our own flaws in Rebus, because he is very flawed. But it also means that he's not too irritating, because I think when you have a character, a protagonist who's far too upbeat, when they've been spending years working their way up to a DS, investigating gritty, grimy crimes, it just doesn't work. Noughts and Crosses absolutely works. This is published now by Orion, and if you're looking to get into a new crime series, I have to say Rankin's Inspector Rebus series is a perfect one to look at, and Noughts and Crosses, the first in the series, is the perfect place to start.